The cold wind cut through the air like a sharp knife. Sarah stood on the frozen ground of Planet 7, watching her breath turn into white clouds. Around her, 11 other beings from different worlds waited for the test to begin. Each one looked very different from the others. The planet was covered in ice and snow. No trees grew here. No animals lived here. Only endless white fields stretched as far as anyone could see. The sky was gray and heavy with clouds that promised more snow would fall soon. Sarah was the only human in the group. She wore a simple coat and boots, nothing special. The other beings had much better equipment. They looked like walking crystals, tall and clear like glass. Their bodies sparkled in the weak sunlight. They were covered in thick fur and stood on 4 legs. They looked like giant bears but walked upright like people. They were the strangest of all. They were made of pure energy and wore special suits to keep their bodies together. The suits glowed with soft light. Without these suits, they would disappear like smoke. There were also the who looked like large insects with 6 arms and hard shells. They wore water-filled suits because they came from ocean worlds. They looked like walking trees with green skin and long branch-like arms. Other species stood nearby too. Each one came from a different world. Each one had survived on planets that would kill most other beings. They all thought they were the strongest and Commander Vex of the Galactic Survival Council stepped forward. He was old and had scars on his face from many battles. His voice was loud and clear when he spoke. "You are here for the final test," he said. "Your species want to join the elite Explorer Corps. Only the best can join. Only the strongest can survive what we do." Sarah listened carefully. She had trained for this day for 2 years. Earth had only recently joined the galactic community. Most aliens thought humans were weak and soft. They lived on an easy world with warm sun and gentle rain. What could they know about real survival? "The rules are simple," Commander Vex continued. "You will survive alone for 3 days. You can take only basic tools. No machines, no computers, no help from others. The storm season starts today. If you live through 3 days of white death storms, you pass the test." He pointed to a small pile of tools. Each being could take a knife, some rope, and a small metal pot. Nothing else. No tents, no heaters, no special equipment from their home worlds. The named laughed. The sound was like breaking glass. "This will be easy," he said. "My people have lived through ice ages. Cold cannot hurt crystal." The Called nodded his huge head. "My fur keeps me warm in space," he said. "This little cold is nothing." Sarah said nothing. She picked up her tools and checked them carefully. The knife was sharp. The rope was strong. The pot was small but would work. She had learned to use simple tools as a child. Her grandmother had taught her old skills that most humans had forgotten. The other beings spread out across the frozen field. Each one wanted to find the best place to wait for the storm. Sarah walked slowly, looking at the ground and the sky. She felt the wind and watched how it moved the snow. The wind was getting stronger. The clouds were getting darker. Sarah had seen storms like this before, not on other planets but in the old stories her grandmother told. Stories of people who lived in the ice long ago. People who knew how to turn cold into warmth and snow into shelter. She found a good spot near a small hill. The ground here was different. The snow was packed tight by the wind. It would be perfect for what she needed to do. The other beings were busy too. They were trying to find rocks to hide behind. They dug holes in the hard ground. They grouped together to share their suit power. Everyone was preparing for a battle against the cold. Sarah knelt down and touched the snow. It was just right. Not too soft, not too hard. She had learned about snow like this in her training. Her teacher was an old man from the Arctic regions of Earth. He had shown her the old ways, the ways people used before they had machines to help them. The first snowflakes began to fall. They were small and hard, driven by the wind like tiny bullets. The temperature was dropping fast. Sarah could see her breath getting thicker. The other beings were starting to shiver. Commander Vex and his team were leaving in their warm ships. They would not return for 3 days. The beings on the ground were now alone with the storm. Sarah looked up at the sky. The clouds were very dark now. This would not be a gentle snow. This would be the white death storm that Seven was famous for. The kind of storm that could kill in minutes if you did not know what to do. She smiled. The other beings thought humans were weak because Earth was warm and safe. They did not know about the places on Earth where ice never melted. They did not know about the people who lived in those places for thousands of years. They did not know the old knowledge that humans carried in their hearts. The wind grew louder. Snow began falling faster. Soon the storm would be here in full force. Sarah began to work. She had much to do and not much time to do it. Around her, the other beings huddled in their shelters and waited for the storm to pass. They hoped their strength and technology would be enough. They did not understand that sometimes the old ways were better than the new ways. The white death storm was coming, and Sarah was ready. The storm hit like a giant fist. One moment the world was quiet with gentle snowflakes. The next moment the wind was screaming and snow was flying everywhere like a white wall. Sarah could not see her own hands in front of her face. The wind was so strong it tried to push her over. The cold bit through her coat like sharp teeth. Around her, she could hear the other beings crying out in shock and fear. The storm was much worse than anyone had expected. The weather machines had said it would be cold, but not this cold. The wind was supposed to be strong, but not this strong. This was not just a white death storm. This was the worst white death storm anyone had seen in years. There was the first to have problems. His crystal body started making small cracking sounds. The sudden cold was making his crystal skin break like glass hit with a hammer. He tried to dig into the snow to hide from the wind, but the cold went right through him. "Help," he called out, but the wind took his voice away. The named was having trouble too. His thick fur was covered with ice. The storm was so cold that even his strong body could not make enough heat. He rolled into a ball and tried to keep warm, but the cold was winning. They were in the worst shape of all. Their special suits were working as hard as they could, but the cold was draining their power very fast. The light from their bodies was getting dim. If their suits failed, they would die in seconds. All around the frozen field, the other beings were fighting for their lives. They tried to dig holes, but the ground was too hard. Their 6 arms could not break through the ice. The water suits were starting to freeze. They went into a deep sleep to save energy, but they were turning blue from the cold. Sarah could hear all of this happening around her, but she could not see any of it. The snow was too thick. The wind was too loud, but she was not afraid. She knew what to do. Her grandmother had told her stories about storms like this. Stories about people who lived in the far north where winter never ended. These people did not fight the cold. They worked with it. They used the snow and ice as friends, not enemies. Sarah knelt down and began to feel the snow around her. Even in the storm, she could tell what kind of snow it was. This was good snow, heavy snow, snow that would stick together and hold its shape. She took out her knife and began to cut blocks of snow. Each block was the size of a brick. She had to work by feel because she could not see anything. The wind tried to steal the blocks from her hands, but she held on tight. Cut, lift, place. Cut, lift, place. Sarah worked in a circle, building up walls of snow blocks around her. The wind was so strong it almost knocked her down many times, but she kept working. The other beings could not understand what the human was doing. Those who had any power left in their equipment tried to watch her on their screens. They saw her building with snow, and they thought she had gone crazy from the cold. "The human has lost her mind," said through his broken voice. "She is building with ice. Ice is what is killing us." Tried to laugh, but he was too cold. "Humans are weak," he said. "The cold has made her think wrong." But Sarah was not thinking wrong. She was thinking like her ancestors. like the people who had lived in ice houses for thousands of years, like the hunters who crossed frozen seas and the families who made homes where no homes should be. She worked faster now. The blocks were getting easier to place as the walls got higher. She was building in a circle, and each new row of blocks leaned in a little more than the last row. Soon the walls would meet at the top and make a dome. The storm was getting worse. The wind was now so strong it could lift a person off the ground. The snow was so thick it was like being buried alive. The cold was so bad that metal was starting to crack. Sarah's hands were getting numb, but she did not stop. She had learned to work through cold pain. She had practiced in the ice caves of Earth's mountains. She knew that if she kept moving, her body would stay warm enough to live. Around her, the other beings were starting to send out emergency calls. They were unconscious in their failed holes. The suits were freezing solid. They were barely glowing now, their power almost gone. But their calls for help went nowhere. The storm was blocking all signals. The rescue ships could not fly in this weather. They were all alone with the White Death, and most of them were losing the battle. Sarah placed the last few blocks at the top of her dome. Now she had a small tunnel entrance that faced away from the wind. She crawled inside her snow house and felt the difference immediately. The wind was gone. The flying snow was gone. It was still cold, but it was a different kind of cold. A quiet cold, a cold she could work with. She was not finished yet. Sarah took some small pieces from her kit and made a tiny lamp that burned with a small flame. The flame was no bigger than her thumb, but in the small space of the snow house, it began to warm the air. Outside, the storm raged on. The wind screamed like a living thing. The snow fell so hard it buried everything. The cold tried to kill anything that lived. But inside her simple house made of snow, Sarah was warm and safe. She had turned the storm's own weapon against it. She had made shelter from the thing that was supposed to destroy her. The other beings were still fighting the storm, still trying to survive until it passed, still thinking that strength alone would save them. They did not yet understand that sometimes the best way to win a fight is not to fight at all. Inside her snow house, Sarah sat quietly and listened to the storm outside. The walls around her were thick and strong. The small flame from her lamp made the air warm and bright. She could not believe how different it felt from the deadly cold just outside her door. She had built what her grandmother called an igloo. It was an old word from the people who lived in Earth's far north. These people had built houses like this for thousands of years. They knew secrets that the rest of the galaxy had forgotten. Sarah checked her work carefully. The walls were smooth on the inside. This was important because smooth walls would not collect ice. The dome shape was perfect because it was the strongest shape for holding weight. Even if heavy snow piled on top, the igloo would not break. The entrance tunnel was built low and facing away from the wind. Cold air was heavy and would stay in the tunnel. Warm air was light and would rise up into the dome. This meant the place where she sat would stay warm while the cold air stayed trapped below. Her small flame heated the air inside, but there was more happening than just that. The heat from her body was warming the air too. The warm air could not escape because of the way the igloo was built. All the heat stayed inside while the cold stayed outside. Outside the igloo, the other beings were getting desperate. The storm had been going for 6 hours now, and it was getting worse instead of better. Many of them were close to death. The was in very bad shape. His crystal body was covered in cracks now. Every few minutes, pieces of him would break off and blow away in the wind. He was slowly breaking apart, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. "I cannot hold together much longer," he called into his radio, but no one could help him. Everyone else was fighting their own battles with the cold. The had stopped moving. He lay curled in a ball under a thin layer of snow. His thick fur was now a shell of ice. His breathing was slow and weak. The cold was winning against even his strong body. They were the closest to dying. Their suits were flashing red warnings. The power was almost gone. Soon the suits would fail completely and they would vanish like smoke in the wind. The other species were not doing any better. They had given up trying to dig and were just lying still, hopping to save energy. They were trapped inside their frozen suits. They had gone so deep into sleep that they might never wake up. All of them had the same problem. They were trying to fight the storm with strength and technology, but the storm was stronger than any of them. The storm was stronger than all of them together. Some of the beings who still had working equipment began to notice something strange on their heat sensors. There was a warm spot on the battlefield, a place where the temperature was much higher than everywhere else. "What is that?" asked one of them. "There is heat coming from the humans' area." The beings who could still move tried to look through the storm toward where Sarah was. They could not see much through the flying snow, but they could see a small mound that had not been there before. "The human built something," said weakly. "I can see it on my scanner. It is warm inside." This made no sense to any of them. How could the human be warm? She had the same tools as everyone else. She came from a warm, easy world. She should be the first one to die in this cold, not the last one standing. "Maybe her equipment is better than ours," suggested one of the. "No," said, "I watched her take the same tools as everyone else. She has nothing special." "Then how is she staying warm?" asked. None of them could answer this question. They had never seen anything like what Sarah had built. In all their travels across the galaxy, they had never seen anyone make shelter from snow and ice. To them, snow and ice were enemies. They were things that killed you, not things that saved you. Sarah could hear some of their radio calls inside her igloo. The walls were thick, but sound could still get through a little. She knew they were confused and afraid. She also knew they were dying. She thought about her grandmother's stories. In the old days when people lived in the ice, they never let anyone die alone in the cold. If someone was freezing, you brought them into your house. You shared your warmth and your food. You helped them live through the night. But this was a test. The rules said she had to survive alone. Helping others might mean she would fail the test. It might mean her people would not be allowed to join the elite explorer corps. Sarah sat in her warm igloo and thought about this. Outside, beings were dying in the cold. Inside, she was safe and warm. What was the right thing to do? She thought about why humans had survived on Earth. It was not because they were the strongest or the fastest. Many animals were stronger and faster than humans. Humans survived because they helped each other, because they shared knowledge, because they worked together when things got hard. The storm outside was getting even worse. The wind was so loud it sounded like a monster screaming. The snow was falling so fast that it would bury anything that did not move. Sarah made her decision. She put on her coat and crawled out of the igloo into the storm. The cold hit her like a punch, but she knew it would not kill her. She had a warm place to return to. She felt around in the snow until she found her emergency beacon. This was supposed to be used only if she was about to die and needed rescue. Using it for any other reason would mean failing the test. But Sarah had a different idea. Instead of calling for rescue, she set the beacon to send out a signal that the other beings could follow, a signal that would lead them to her igloo. She crawled back inside and waited. Soon she would find out if the most dangerous part of being human was also the most important part. The part where you chose to help others, even when it might cost you everything. The first to find Sarah's igloo was he was barely alive, with pieces of his crystal body scattered behind him in the snow. He followed the beacon signal, crawling on his hands and knees through the storm. When he found the small tunnel entrance, he could not believe what he saw. Warm air was coming out of the hole, real warm air, not from any machine, but from inside a house made of snow. "This cannot be real," he whispered, but he was too cold to think clearly. He crawled through the tunnel on his belly, moving toward the warmth. Sarah heard him coming and moved over to make room. When emerged into the dome, he stopped and stared. The inside of the igloo was warm and bright. The walls glowed softly from the small flame. There was space for several people to sit comfortably. "How?" was all could say. His voice sounded like cracking ice. "Sit down and warm up first," Sarah said. "I will explain everything." As warmed up, his crystal body stopped cracking. The heat made his wounds heal and his color return to normal. He had never felt anything like it. Soon they found the tunnel too. He was so big he could barely fit through the entrance, but the warmth drew him in like magic. Behind him came two of their suits flickering with almost no power left. One by one, the surviving beings found their way to Sarah's igloo. Each one crawled through the low tunnel and emerged into the impossible warmth. Each one stared in amazement at what the human had built. The igloo was bigger inside than it looked from outside. Sarah had built it perfectly, with just the right curve to the walls and just the right height for the ceiling. Everyone could sit comfortably around the small flame. "I do not understand," said. "You built this from snow. Snow is cold. How can cold things make warmth?" Sarah smiled. She was happy to share what she knew. "Snow is not just cold," she said. "Snow is also air. Lots of tiny air bubbles trapped between ice crystals. Air is one of the best things for keeping heat inside." She pointed to the walls around them. "These walls are thick snow blocks. The air bubbles in the snow stop the cold from getting through. It works like the fur on your body, but even better." The beings listened carefully. This was knowledge they had never heard before. "But why is it warm in here?" asked one of the. "We are not burning much fuel." "The shape is important too," Sarah explained. "A dome is the best shape for holding heat. The warm air goes up to the top and stays there. The cold air goes down to the bottom and stays in the tunnel." She showed them how she had built the entrance tunnel low and facing away from the wind. Cold air is heavy. It falls down and stays in the tunnel. Warm air is light. It rises up and stays in the dome where we sit. "Also," she continued, "our bodies make heat. When that heat has nowhere to go, it warms the air around us. In a space this size, heat from our bodies is enough to keep us comfortable." Touched the wall next to him. It was cold, but not the killing cold from outside. "The wall is still cold, but we are warm. How is this possible?" "The wall is cold on the outside," Sarah said, "but it is warmer on the inside. The snow blocks stop the heat from escaping and stop the cold from coming in, like wearing a thick coat but for a whole room." She told them about the people of Earth who had lived in houses like this for thousands of years. People who survived in places where the temperature never got above freezing. People who raised families and built communities in the ice. "My people learned these things long ago," she said. "Before we had machines to make heat, before we had metal and computers. We learned to live with the ice, not fight against it." The beings in the igloo listened to her stories with growing wonder. Sarah told them about ice fishermen who built shelters on frozen lakes, about hunters who traveled across frozen seas in boats made of skin and wood, about families who lived through winters that lasted half a year. "We learned that nature is not our enemy," Sarah said. "Nature has tools we can use if we know how to use them. Snow can kill you, but snow can also save you. Cold can freeze you, but cold can also preserve you. Wind can knock you down, but wind can also tell you which way to build your door." Outside, the storm continued to rage. But inside the igloo, a strange thing was happening. The beings from different worlds were talking to each other like friends. They shared stories from their own planets. They talked about the different ways their people survived in hard times. Told them about the ice caves his people dug on their frozen. They explained how they learned to save energy during long space journeys. Even, whose people usually kept to themselves, shared knowledge about how crystal beings survived in the cold emptiness between stars. "This is interesting," said Sarah. "You all have survival knowledge from your own worlds, but you forgot to use it here because this place was different from your homes." "That is true," admitted. "I know how to survive cold, but not cold with wind like this. On my world we have cold, but not storms." "And I know how to save energy," said one of the, "but I never thought about using snow as shelter. On my world we have energy, but no snow." Sarah nodded. "That is why sharing knowledge is so important. I knew about snow houses, but I learned new things from listening to all of you tonight. Together, we know more than any of us knows alone." As the night went on, the small igloo became filled with warmth and friendship. The beings who had started the day as competitors were now companions, sharing heat and knowledge and stories. Outside, the white death storm continued its fury. But inside, something new was growing. Something that none of them had expected when they came to this frozen world to prove who was strongest. They were learning that maybe being strong was not the most important thing after all. The storm finally began to calm on the morning of the third day. The wind stopped screaming and became a whisper. The snow stopped flying and fell gently like white feathers. Through the small entrance of the igloo, Sarah could see sunlight for the first time in days. But the beings inside were in no hurry to leave their warm shelter. They had spent 2 days talking and sharing stories. They had learned more about each other in the igloo than they had in months of training together. When the rescue ships finally arrived, their sensors could not find the test subjects at first. The heat signatures were all coming from one small spot that looked like a natural snow mound. The rescue team was confused. "Where are they?" asked the pilot. "We should see 12 different heat sources spread across the field. Instead, we see one large source in what looks like an ice hill." Commander Vex was on the lead ship. He had run this test many times before. Usually, the rescue team found survivors scattered across the field, hiding in whatever poor shelter they could make. Many were unconscious from cold. Some did not survive at all. "Land near that heat source," he ordered. "Something unusual is happening here." When the rescue team reached the igloo, they found something they had never seen before. 12 beings from different worlds were sitting together in a cozy snow house, talking and laughing like old friends. They were warm, healthy, and happy. The rescue team stared in amazement. These beings had just survived the worst storm in years, but they looked like they had been having a party instead of fighting for their lives. "How is this possible?" asked one of the rescue workers. Sarah crawled out of the igloo first. She stood up and brushed snow off her coat, smiling. "We built a house," she said simply. Behind her, the other beings emerged one by one. Each one looked rested and well, not at all like people who had just survived 3 days of deadly cold. Commander Vex walked around the igloo, studying it carefully. He had never seen anything like it. It was built from nothing but snow blocks, but it had kept everyone alive and comfortable. "Who built this?" he asked. "Sarah did," said. "She saved all our lives." "But we all helped make it better," Sarah added quickly. "Everyone shared their knowledge. Everyone helped keep it warm." The rescue team took detailed measurements of the igloo. They photographed it from every angle. They tested the temperature inside and outside. The numbers were hard to believe. "The outside temperature reached -60 degrees, reported one worker. But inside this structure, it stayed at +10 degrees, with no external heat source except body heat and one small flame." Commander Vex listened to the reports with growing interest. Then he asked each being to tell their story of what happened during the storm. Spoke first. "I was dying," he said. "My body was breaking apart, but Sarah sent a signal to guide us to her shelter. She risked failing the test to save our lives. She did not just give us shelter," added. "She taught us how it worked. She shared knowledge that our people had lost or never learned." One of them nodded. "And she listened to our knowledge too. We learned from each other. We became stronger together than any of us were alone." As Commander Vex heard all the stories, his expression changed. The hard lines around his eyes became softer. The stern look on his face became something like surprise. "Sarah," he said, "you used your emergency beacon. According to the rules, this means you failed the test." Sarah's heart sank. She had known this might happen, but she had made her choice anyway. "Yes, sir," she said, "I understand." "But you did not use it to call for rescue," the commander continued. "You used it to guide others to safety. This is interesting." He walked away from the group and spoke quietly into his radio for several minutes. The beings waited nervously, not knowing what would happen next. When Commander Vex returned, he had a strange smile on his face. "I have just spoken with the council leadership," he said. "They want me to explain something about this test." He gestured to the frozen landscape around them. "This test was never about individual survival. We have machines that can keep anyone alive in any weather. We do not need people who can simply survive." The beings looked at each other in confusion. "What we need," the commander continued, "are people who can do more than survive. We need people who can take a deadly situation and turn it into something better. We need people who build instead of just endure." He pointed to the Igloo. "Most species who take this test try to hide from the storm until it passes. They think about saving themselves and only themselves. They compete instead of cooperate." Sarah began to understand what he was saying. "The real test," Commander Vex explained, "was to see if anyone would choose to help others when helping others might cost them everything. We were testing for compassion, not just strength." He looked directly at Sarah. "Your people call it humanity, do they not? The quality of caring about others, even strangers, even when it is dangerous to do so." Sarah nodded. She remembered her grandmother's stories about people who risked their own lives to help others in the ice. "That is what we need in the elite Explorer Corps," the commander said. "Not just people who can survive in space, but people who can help others survive. People who can turn any place, even the most dangerous place, into a home." He made an announcement that surprised everyone. "All 12 beings passed the test. You have shown that different species can work together and learn from each other. You have shown that survival is not about being strong alone, but about being strong together." But then he added something special. "Sarah, you have shown something else. You have shown leadership, the kind of leadership that brings out the best in others. Therefore, you will not just join the elite Explorer Corps, you will help train future members." The other beings cheered. They had all passed and they had all learned something important. Later, as the ships prepared to leave 7, Commander Vex asked Sarah a final question. "What made you decide to help the others? You knew it might cost you the test." Sarah looked back at the Igloo, which would soon be covered by new snow and forgotten. But what happened inside it would be remembered forever. "My grandmother used to say that a person alone is just trying to survive," she said. "But people together are trying to live. I did not want to just survive. I wanted all of us to live." The Igloo had melted by the time they reached orbit, but its lesson remained. Sometimes the greatest strength is not in standing alone against the storm, but in building a place where everyone can stand together. And sometimes the most human thing you can do is to help others find their own humanity too.